At the edge of a clearing, bathed in the cool light of an early autumn morning, park rangers found the first sign that something was wrong. It was a high-quality nylon tent, its green fabric a stark, unnatural shape against the ancient trees of the Whisperwood National Forest. Inside, a sleeping bag was unrolled but empty, and a book lay open, its pages slightly damp with dew. The campsite belonged to Elias Thorne, a man who knew the wilderness better than most people know their own homes. He was an expert, an author of survival guides, a man who planned for every contingency. Yet, on the fourth day of what was meant to be a 3-day solo hike, his perfectly ordered camp was all that remained of him. The scene was not one of violence or panic. It was one of unsettling stillness. It was as if he had simply stepped out for a moment and dissolved into the air. Investigators were left with a collection of mundane objects and a single profound question that echoed through the silent forest. How could a man so prepared for everything vanish without a trace? To understand the depth of the mystery, one first had to understand the man. Elias Thorne was not a casual weekend hiker. He was a student of the wild, a practitioner of its disciplines. At 47 years old, he had spent more than 2 decades exploring, mapping, and writing about the most remote corners of the continent. His background was that of a seasoned professional. He had worked for years as a lead guide for a prestigious outdoor adventure company, leading clients through treacherous terrain in Alaska and the Canadian Rockies. He was certified in wilderness first aid, advanced navigation, and swift water rescue. His peers described him as preternaturally calm under pressure, a man whose movements were efficient and deliberate. Thorne's reputation was built on his meticulous nature. Friends and family recounted how he planned every excursion with the precision of a military operation. He would spend days studying topographical maps, memorizing landmarks, and charting alternative routes. He created detailed gear lists, weighing every item down to the ounce, ensuring a perfect balance of utility and efficiency. He had even published 2 well-regarded books on the subject. The first, The Deliberate Woodsman, was a philosophical and practical guide to long-term solo trekking. The second, Reading the Land, was a textbook on navigation using only natural signs, the sun, the stars, the subtle patterns of vegetation and terrain. He was, by all accounts, the last person who should ever get lost. The location he had chosen for his early October trip was the Sentinel Ridge Trail in the Whisperwood National Forest. This was familiar territory, a place he had hiked dozens of times before. He considered it his backyard, a sanctuary where he could disconnect from the modern world and reconnect with the fundamental rhythms of nature. The Whisperwood itself was a vast expanse of old-growth forest, rolling hills and granite outcrops. While beautiful, it had a reputation among locals for being deceptively challenging. The dense canopy could obscure landmarks, the weather could shift without warning, and the quiet of the woods was said to be so profound that it could disorient the unprepared. But Elias Thorne was not unprepared. His plan, which he had left with his sister Sarah, was characteristically precise. He intended to complete a 28-mile loop over 3 days and 2 nights. The itinerary listed his intended campsites, key waypoints with estimated arrival times, and a firm return date. His gear was a testament to his expertise. He carried a lightweight but durable pack, a 4-season tent, a sub-zero sleeping bag, and a multi-fuel stove. His navigation tools included a high-end compass, a GPS device with extra batteries, and his laminated hand-annotated maps of the region. He packed enough dehydrated food for 5 days, a surplus of 2, and carried a sophisticated water filtration system. His sister Sarah was the last person in his life to speak with him. She recalled a perfectly normal conversation the evening before he departed. He was calm, looking forward to the solitude of the trail. There was no mention of any personal troubles, financial worries, or emotional distress. His life was stable, his work was fulfilling, and this trip was nothing more than a routine, cherished ritual. On the morning of Tuesday, October 5th, Elias Thorne drove his modest pickup truck to the Sentinel Ridge trailhead. He signed the trail register at the ranger station at 8:15 a.m., his familiar, neat handwriting noting his name, his intended route, and his expected date of return, Thursday, October 7th, in the late afternoon. The ranger on duty, a man who knew Thorne by name, remembered waving to him as he set off. The first day of his hike appeared to have gone exactly as planned. 2 day hikers, a young couple, later reported seeing a man matching Thorne's description around midday. They remembered him because of his professional-looking gear and the confident, steady pace he maintained. They exchanged a brief, friendly nod as he passed, continuing deeper into the forest. According to the itinerary he left, Thorne planned to make his first camp in a small, sheltered basin known as Sparrowhawk Meadow, approximately 10 miles in. It was a logical stopping point, with a reliable water source and protection from the wind. It was here, in this meadow, that his tent would later be found. His journal, a small leather-bound book he always carried, was found on his sleeping bag. The first and only entry was dated Tuesday evening. It was brief and factual, written in his typical style. He noted the clear weather, the good trail conditions, and a sighting of a pileated woodpecker. The entry ended with a simple observation: "Quiet night, stars are bright." The words held no hint of alarm, no premonition of what was to come. They painted a picture of a man at peace, perfectly at home in his element. He had eaten a meal, made his notes, and presumably settled in for the night, ready for the second day of his journey. What happened after that entry was written remains a complete mystery. The timeline for Wednesday, October 6th, is a blank slate. He was scheduled to cover another 12 miles, a challenging section of the trail that included a steep ascent to a landmark called Eagle's Peak. No one reported seeing him on the trail that day. When Thursday evening came and went with no word from Elias, his sister Sarah began to worry. He was punctual to a fault. Being late without communication was entirely out of character. By Friday morning, her concern had grown into genuine fear. She contacted the Park Service and officially reported him overdue. The search began within hours. The initial team consisted of 2 park rangers who drove to the trailhead and confirmed his truck was still parked in the lot. They hiked in, following his intended route. Given Thorne's experience, they initially suspected a simple injury, a twisted ankle or a broken leg that had left him immobilized, but alive. They reached Sparrowhawk Meadow in the late afternoon. From a distance, the sight of his tent was a relief. They called out his name, expecting a response from within. But the only answer was the sound of the wind moving through the pines. The state of the campsite was the first major clue, and it was deeply perplexing. Everything was in its proper place. His main backpack, weighing over 40 pounds, sat just inside the tent's vestibule. Inside it were his stove, fuel canister, spare clothing, and the bulk of his food supply. His wallet and car keys were tucked into a side pocket. The half-eaten meal, a portion of rehydrated stew, was in a sealed container next to his pack. This suggested he had either been interrupted during his dinner the first night or was preparing breakfast on the second morning. The exact timing was unclear, but the orderliness of the scene made an emergency seem unlikely. Investigators cataloged what was present and, more importantly, what was not. His heavy hiking boots, the ones he would need for any serious trekking, were gone. His custom-made survival knife, a tool he was never without, was also missing from its sheath. His compass was gone, as was a small, lightweight daypack he used for short excursions away from camp. Inside that daypack, he customarily carried a water bottle, a high-energy snack, a rain jacket, and a small first aid kit. The collection of missing items painted a clear picture. Elias Thorne had intentionally left his main camp for a short trip. He had put on his boots and taken only the essentials, presumably intending to return within a few hours at most. He had left behind his tent, his sleeping bag, his primary food source, and his heavy pack. He had walked away from his shelter and supplies, and into the vast, silent wilderness. The question was why, and in which direction. The official search and rescue operation ramped up quickly. By Saturday, the effort involved over 50 personnel from the County Sheriff's Department, the Park Service, and volunteer search teams. A command post was established at the trailhead, and the area around Thorne's campsite became the epicenter of a meticulous grid search. The terrain surrounding Sparrowhawk Meadow was a complex mixture of dense forest, thick underbrush, and rocky, uneven ground. It was challenging, but not impassable. Searchers moved shoulder to shoulder, scanning the ground for any sign of his passing. A broken twig, a scuff mark on a rock, a dropped piece of equipment. They found nothing. Despite the exhaustive search of the immediate 2-square-mile area, not a single piece of physical evidence turned up. It was as if the forest floor had been swept clean. The lack of tracks was particularly baffling. The ground in the meadow was soft enough to hold impressions, but the only footprints found were those of the searchers themselves. On the third day of the search, K9 units were brought in. These were highly trained search dogs, capable of detecting human scent from days earlier. The handlers took an article of Thorne's clothing from his truck to give the dogs a scent to track. At the campsite, the dogs immediately showed interest. They picked up a strong scent trail leading away from the tent. This was the first significant break in the case, a tangible thread to follow. The search teams felt a surge of hope, believing they were finally on the right path. The dogs led their handlers not toward the main Sentinel Ridge Trail, but east into a denser section of the woods. The path they followed was not a trail. It was a difficult scramble over fallen logs and through thickets of mountain laurel. It seemed an unlikely direction for a casual walk. For approximately 400 yards, the trail was clear and strong. The dogs were confident, pulling their handlers forward. The path led directly toward a series of steep granite outcrops and shallow ravines, a geologically complex area that was difficult to navigate. Then, the truly inexplicable occurred. In a small, unremarkable clearing surrounded by moss-covered boulders, the dogs' behavior changed dramatically. They stopped, sniffed the air, and began to circle in confusion. The scent trail, which had been so powerful just moments before, had vanished completely. The handlers described it as if Thorne had been abruptly lifted into the sky. The trail did not fade out, branch off, or become muddled. It simply ceased to exist in a single spot. The dogs were cast again and again, but they could not reacquire the scent in any direction. It was gone. This anomaly became the central, baffling mystery of the entire investigation. Searchers scoured every inch of the area where the scent had stopped. They rappelled into the small ravines, checked for hidden cave entrances, and probed the ground for any concealed holes. They found nothing. Helicopters equipped with forward-looking infrared (FLIR) cameras were deployed to scan the forest for any heat signature. They flew low over the search area for days, their sensors capable of detecting a living person even through the dense tree canopy. The thermal imaging revealed plenty of deer and other wildlife, but no sign of a human being. As the search entered its second week, the mood among the team shifted from hopeful to frustrated. The Whisperwood was vast, but the concentration of resources in such a specific area should have yielded some result. The complete absence of evidence felt unnatural. Experienced trackers brought in to assist were equally stumped. They could find no footprints, no signs of passage beyond the point where the dogs had lost the trail. It was during this time that a new piece of information emerged, though its reliability was questionable. A hiker who had been on a different trail, the less-traveled Peregrine Crest, which ran parallel to Sentinel Ridge, about 3 miles to the east, came forward. He told investigators he remembered seeing a lone man on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 6th. The man he saw was on the ridge across the valley from him, moving with purpose. He matched Thorne's general description: tall, lean, wearing dark outdoor clothing. What stood out to the witness was the man's speed. He was moving much faster than a typical hiker, almost at a light jog across difficult off-trail terrain. The sighting was problematic for several reasons. The distance was significant, making a positive identification impossible. Furthermore, for Thorne to be in that location on Wednesday afternoon, he would have had to abandon his camp early that morning, travel at a grueling pace across miles of wilderness, and completely deviate from his meticulously planned route. It didn't align with the evidence at the campsite, which suggested a short, casual departure. Yet the location was roughly in the direction the dogs had tracked before the scent disappeared. The account was logged by investigators, but it remained an unverified and confusing outlier, a piece that didn't fit into any logical puzzle. After 14 days of intensive searching with over 10,000 man-hours invested and hundreds of square miles covered, the official operation was scaled down. The Park Service announced that while Thorne would remain listed as a missing person, the active search was being suspended pending new information. The forest fell silent once more. The command post was dismantled, the volunteers went home, and Elias Thorne's truck was eventually towed from the trailhead parking lot. All that was left was the story, which quickly grew into a local legend. The tale of the expert woodsman who walked into a forest he knew like the back of his hand and never walked out. Music. In the weeks and months that followed, investigators, family members, and amateur sleuths were left to sift through the few known facts and endless speculation. Without a body or any new evidence, all they could do was formulate theories, each one attempting to explain the unexplainable. The most straightforward and common theory was that Elias Thorne had been the victim of a fatal accident. Proponents of this view argued that he had left his camp for a brief exploration, perhaps to photograph the sunrise from the nearby granite outcrops, or to find a more secluded spot to relieve himself. In this scenario, he suffered a sudden, incapacitating event. He could have slipped on a patch of wet moss, fallen, and struck his head, losing consciousness. Or he might have stumbled into a deep, narrow crevice, becoming trapped and hidden from view. The Whisperwood's terrain was certainly treacherous enough in places to conceal such a scene. A hidden fissure or an old, overgrown mine shaft could have easily swallowed him. If he were injured and unable to call for help, he would have succumbed to exposure within a few days. His body might simply lie in a place that the search teams, despite their diligence, had overlooked. However, this theory had significant weaknesses. The search was exceptionally thorough, specifically targeting the kinds of geological features where a person might fall and become hidden. Teams with specialized cave and crevice rescue training had scoured the area where the scent trail ended. It seemed improbable that they would have missed him. The most glaring contradiction remained: the behavior of the K9 units. A person who falls and dies in a specific location still leaves a powerful scent source. The dog should have led searchers directly to his body. The abrupt termination of the scent trail was not consistent with a simple accident. It suggested a different kind of event entirely. A second theory considered was an encounter with wildlife. The Whisperwood was home to black bears and, more elusively, mountain lions. It was plausible that Thorne had startled a predator, provoking a sudden and fatal attack. An animal could have dragged his body away to a den, hiding it from the search parties. This explanation accounted for the disappearance of his body, but it failed to align with the evidence at the scene. An attack by a large predator, such as a bear or cougar, is an incredibly violent event. It would have undoubtedly left behind signs of a struggle: torn clothing, blood, drag marks on the ground, and scattered equipment. The campsite was pristine, and the area where the scent trail ended was equally undisturbed. Furthermore, the search dogs were trained to indicate the presence of predators, and they gave no such alerts. There had been no reports of aggressive animal behavior in that part of the forest, before or since the incident. The animal attack theory, while dramatic, was largely dismissed due to a total lack of supporting physical evidence. This led investigators to consider a darker possibility: foul play. Perhaps Elias Thorne did not encounter an animal, but another person. In this scenario, he stumbled upon something illegal: a poacher's camp, a clandestine drug operation, and was silenced to protect a secret. Or he could have been the victim of a random, motiveless act of violence. This theory suggested he was either killed near his camp and his body carefully hidden, or he was abducted and taken from the area entirely. The abduction scenario offered a potential explanation for the abruptly ending scent trail. If he were forced into a vehicle on a remote service road, the trail would indeed stop cold. But this line of reasoning was also fraught with problems. There were no such remote roads anywhere near the location where the dogs lost the scent. The logistics of forcibly removing a capable, strong man like Thorne from deep in the wilderness without leaving a single sign of a struggle seemed nearly impossible. Moreover, Thorne had no known enemies. His personal life was investigated thoroughly and revealed nothing to suggest he was a target. He was a quiet, respected man with a small circle of friends. The idea of a random killer lurking in that specific remote part of the forest seemed statistically infinitesimal. Foul play remained a possibility, as it always does in such cases, but it was a theory with no motive, no suspects, and no evidence. The final major theory was perhaps the most unsettling to those who knew him. that Elias Thorne chose to disappear. According to this hypothesis, he had grown tired of his life and orchestrated his own vanishing. He could have packed a hidden cache of supplies beforehand and, under the guise of a routine hike, simply walked away to start a new life elsewhere. This scenario would explain the lack of a body and the strange, cold trail. He could have intentionally confused the search dogs, perhaps by wading through a stream or using other techniques he himself had written about to mask his scent. The abandoned camp could have been a deliberate piece of misdirection. Yet this theory ran contrary to everything known about Thorne's character and circumstances. His sister, Sarah, was adamant that he would never willingly cause his family such pain. His finances showed no unusual activity. His bank accounts remained untouched. There was no evidence he had created a new identity or made any preparations for a life on the run. Why would a man, at the peak of his career, financially secure, and deeply connected to his loved ones, abandon everything? It made no psychological sense. While it was impossible to rule out entirely, the voluntary disappearance theory felt like an ill-fitting explanation for a man who, by all accounts, was content with the life he had built. Each theory was a dead end. An accident was contradicted by the scent dogs. An animal attack was contradicted by the lack of physical evidence. Foul play was contradicted by the absence of a motive or a struggle. A voluntary disappearance was contradicted by the man's entire life history. The mystery of Elias Thorne became a collection of irreconcilable facts. The orderly camp suggested a planned, short departure. The missing items, boots, knife, compass, day pack, confirmed this. But the length of his absence and the utter failure of a massive search operation to find him suggested something else entirely. The strange, abrupt end of his scent trail remained the most impenetrable piece of the puzzle. It was a physical data point that defied conventional explanation. Investigators were forced to entertain more fringe ideas, that he had been picked up by a helicopter, an idea with no evidence to support it, or that he had discovered a hidden cave system unknown to anyone, a system from which he never emerged. Years passed. The Whisperwood National Forest continued to draw hikers and campers, but the Sentinel Ridge Trail was now imbued with a somber legend. Some visitors claimed to feel an unusual coldness in the air near Sparrowhawk Meadow. Others spoke of a profound and unsettling silence in the area where the dogs had lost the trail. The case of Elias Thorne was officially declared cold, but it never truly closed. For his family, it remained an open wound. For the searchers who had dedicated weeks of their lives to finding him, it was a source of professional frustration and lingering humility in the face of nature's mysteries. His story serves as a stark reminder that the wilderness operates by its own rules, indifferent to human expertise and preparation. Elias Thorne had dedicated his life to understanding that wilderness, to reading its language and respecting its power. But in the end, the forest kept a secret he was not meant to share. He walked away from his camp on a clear autumn day, equipped with the knowledge and tools to survive almost anything. He took his boots, his knife, and his compass and stepped into the woods. He left behind a half-eaten meal, an open book, and a mystery that endures to this day, as silent and vast as the forest that holds the answer. What do you think really happened to Elias Thorne? Was it a tragic accident the searchers simply missed? Did he encounter something or someone sinister in the quiet woods? Or did he orchestrate his own vanishing act? Share your theory in the comments, and if you enjoy unresolved mysteries like this, like the video and subscribe for more.